Hello everyone, welcome to ResearchHUB. I'm Ziaul Haq Munim, the founder of ResearchHUB, and I'm also working as an associate professor in Norway. In this lecture, we are going to talk about the structure of a master thesis and the approximate length of a master thesis. So in a thesis, normally, first we will have the title, which should not be usually more than 15 words, maximum 18 words, never more than 18 words. Then we will have the abstract, which should be normally between 300 to 400 words. Then you start with the introduction section, which should be between 1500 to 2000 words. You will have the literature review between 2000 to 3000 words. Data and method section can be between 2000 to 2500 words to 3000 words. Sometimes people do the data and method section in two sections or two chapters. So people will talk about the data part and then separate part for method, but that's totally okay. But you can also do it in the same chapter. So you can have the data and method chapter. You can have two subsections, one dedicated to data, another dedicated to method. Then you will have the results, which is normally between 2000 to 3000 words. You will have the discussion, which is about 1500 to 2000 words. The conclusion is usually about 1000 to 1200, 1500 words. And then you will have some references. It is recommended that you use minimum 20 journal articles in a master thesis, plus some books and reports. Normally, the books we use in the method section to explain the method itself and also the philosophy of science and also the research design related issues. The reports we usually use in the introduction section or in the discussion section. So in the introduction section, we use the reports to motivate why we're doing this research. And in the discussion section, normally we use some reports to explain the implications of our findings for industry and policy. But most of the journal articles, they go in the literature review section, but also in the some in the introduction section and also some in the discussion section. Especially so in the discussion section, often we do it in two parts: contribution to literature and implication for policy. So in the contribution to literature section, normally you will use the literature review articles to kind of argue like how you contribute on top of the literature, and then you use some reports to discuss the implication for policy in the discussion section. So, and then you will have the appendix. Normally there is no word limit for appendix. When we're doing the data analysis and data collection, we do a lot of things which are not really core to the thesis, and often we don't put it in the main part of the thesis, but then we put them in the appendix. So here we have mainly 6 sections which are core to the thesis, and then we have a couple of sections which we do before the title and abstract, and a couple of sections reference and appendix after the core part of the thesis, right? It is highly recommended that you use Zotero or EndNote for reference management. Otherwise, it becomes really challenging in the end to manage all the references you will have. Usually, a master thesis should have, from like 20 to around 40 or 50 references. More than that, it becomes difficult to really read more than that and keep track of them. And then if we add all these lower limits here, all these lower limit values, you will see that you get something around 11,300 words. If you add all these upper limits here, you will see you will get around 14,600 words. So in general, a master thesis should be like around 12,000 to 15,000 words. So that's the approximate. It's like a rule of thumb. There is no like law-like issues here that it has to be this and it has to be that. I mean, master thesis should not be less than 11,000, 12,000 words. That's something for sure. But for the upper limit, there is not really any particular value here. We have seen theses as 20,000 words, 25,000 words. So it's totally up to you and your supervisor how much you want to do. But also you have to remember that the number of words often does not have much to do with the grade you will get and the quality you will get. And the quality, yeah. So, you know, it might be that a thesis which is 12,000 word gets an A, and then a thesis which is 20,000 words gets an B or C. So that's very common too. So it's more about how you do each of these sections. if you are following the proper scientific guidelines and the academic writing styles. So that's more important. Here, just wanted to share a couple of examples from the master thesis that I have supervised. So for example, these theses that I supervised in 2020, it had about 22,000 words, which was about 89 pages in total, including everything, acknowledgement, table of contents, all these things, and appendix. And then here, another thesis that I supervised also in 2020, it had about 17,000 words. It was about 106 pages. So here, a few things to notice here is that although this is, in terms of words, more, it has less number of pages compared to this one, right? So often, we use a lot of tables and figures, which might take a lot of space and the word count might not go up. So that's something also you have to remember, So here, when we're discussing about these word limits, so normally if we write in an A4 size page, if we write in 1.5 line spacing, often you will write between 700 to 1,000 words in one per page, okay? So often you will write 700 to 1,000 words per page. So if we think about introduction, it is supposed to be like 2 to 3 pages normally, right? So that's the typical length of introduction, 2, 3, maximum 4 pages. The literature review, it could be between 3 to 5 pages, right? But often you will see the literature review is a bit longer. Often it becomes 7, 8 pages easily. That's because often in the literature review part, we use some tables and figures. So we put some tables with the literature search process. Sometimes we put some tables with the summary of the literature, the core literature, maybe the content analysis of 15 to 20 articles that we really reviewed in detail in our thesis work. So it can easily become 7, 8 pages. Same also here in the data and method, although it is supposed to be like 3 to 4 pages, but often it can be like 5, 6 pages or more. So that's simply because that we will again have some tables and sometimes figures in the data and method part, so it becomes longer. Similar here in the result section, it can easily become 5, 6 pages because often we use some tables and figures. Normally the discussion section is between 2 to 3 pages. Again, we often don't use much tables and figures in the discussion section, so it's mainly text, two sections, one dedicated to contribution to literature, another dedicated to implications for policy and practice. So it's mostly text, so it doesn't really get more than 2 or 3 pages. The conclusion is normally between 1 to 2 pages. Yeah, if we have done a good discussion section, the conclusion is usually shorter. In the first paragraph of contribution, we normally explain how we answered our research question that we mentioned in the introduction section. And then in the second paragraph, we talk about some of the limitations of the thesis, and the last paragraph normally gives some indication for future research. So that's mostly about the sections and the structure of the thesis. Make sure that your thesis looks neat and clean, because when we are grading a thesis, if we see it looks very nice, we often start with a good feeling, and we feel like, okay, so it looks good, everything is nicely formatted, maybe it's a very good thesis. So we start looking for reasons to give good grades. Okay, so that's something have in mind, that before submission, make sure that it looks clean, it looks nice. Another point here is that where to really start. So you know that you have to do these 6 sections, but where do you really start? Of course, you can start following a very linear approach with the title, abstract, introduction, literature review, data, methods, results, discussion, and conclusion. So each section, one after another, that would be a very linear approach. But often, some of us, we feel it challenging to write the introduction part. We are not sure what should be the first sentence in the introduction, what should we really put there. Of course, there are some guidelines for that. I will make some videos later for each of these sections, how to really do each of the sections. But in general, if you find it challenging to start with the introduction, start with the literature review. So we will normally have the title, we might have a tentative abstract and some points in the introduction. Okay, and then we can actually start with the literature review, because we can start with a very systematic literature search and just start writing about it, how we did the search, how many articles we found, and a content analysis of the core literature. And then we can proceed with the data and method section. We can write the results, discussion, conclusion, and then come back to introduction and finalize the introduction, and in the end, finalize the abstract. So we might have a tentative abstract and introduction in the beginning, but we finalize them in the end. That's kind of the approach I follow. Okay, I always start with literature review almost all the time. I go to a database, scoop or Web of Science. I do some Boolean search and I find the literature. I start writing about them and then proceed with the data, method, results, discussion, conclusion, and then come back to introduction and abstract. Some people might do this, but I don't really recommend this for a master thesis. So some people might do data, method, results, discussion, conclusion, then they do literature review and introduction and then abstract. But I don't recommend it for a master thesis. Normally, this could be more common in the medicine and engineering domain, especially when there are very experienced professor who has been working on this topic for 10, 20 years, because they already have a very good control over the literature and they know the gaps, where the gaps are and so on. So they might follow this approach, but I don't really recommend this approach for a beginner or for a master thesis. So I highly recommend this. I'm not saying this is the best way of doing it. There could be other ways of doing it, but I do this approach and I highly recommend this approach. So good luck with your master thesis. I hope you find it useful. Bye-bye for now.